Welcome to Xcode tutorials. Today we're going to be doing a little tutorial with Xcode version 8.3.2. You're welcome to use other versions of Xcode, but I do recommend using an 8.3 or after version. Some of the stuff we're going to do, it may not be available in prior versions. I prefer this one, but you're welcome to do whatever you'd like. We're going to build a simple app today, and so we're going to click Create New Xcode Project. And we're going to want to do a single view application. And so we're going to select that, click Next. Let's just name this App Example, and click Next. And actually, before I click Next, just make sure we're in the Swift language. And also, let's say universal, we want it to work for both iPhones or iPads. And click Next, select a file where you'd like it to be stored, a folder, excuse me. Okay. And we want to first go to the main.storyboard. What you can see here, this is called a view controller. This is basically the screen that you're physically going to see when you open up an application. And so this is the initial screen you're going to see. So what we're going to want to do in our example is we're going to want to insert an image view. And then in image view, we're going to use it as a background. Okay. And we could add a picture if we'd like to, but we're just going to make this a black background. So I'm actually going to go to the crayons here, give it a black color, and it appears dark blue on here, but on the actual app screen it's going to be a dark black. And then we're next going to want to add a button. Okay. We're just oh, excuse me. Okay, we're going to want to add this button. We're going to want to make the button a little bit bigger, and we're going to name this ShowTextField. Actually, let's stretch out this button a little bit. And let's make the color white. That way it's going to show up well, given that black background that we have. Let's increase the size. If you'd like to mess around with the fonts and the sizes and all that later on, feel free to do so. But for this example, we're just going to make a very simple, very basic button. And we're next going to want to add a label. And this is the text field that we're actually going to show on the app. Okay. And let's, inside the text field, I mean, this can be any kind of text. But we're going to say this text should be hidden. And what we're going to basically do is we don't want this text to be shown. We don't want it to be shown until the button is pressed that says Show Text Field. And we're also going to want to make the text white. That way you can see it better on the black background. Okay, and while we're at it, why don't we give a background for the button, the label. Let's just say, let's make it white, and let's give it an opacity of about 12. And let's do the same with the button. We'll use a recently used colors so they match up, so the same. And you can see that they don't really line up very well. Let's try to just get those centered. And I'm going to show you guys in a little bit how to actually align them so that they work universally for different kinds of screens. Right now, as you can see, we're viewing this as if it's an iPhone 7. There are a lot of different types of iPhones and iOS devices out there, so obviously you can't design an app purely based off of one kind. I'm going to show you that here in a little bit. But moving on, to actually get it to show or not show this text field, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to click this. It's called View Assistant Editor. It's a button with the two circles, kind of like a Venn diagram up here. We don't need to see that right screen for this. And what we're going to want to do is we're going to actually drag this button over Control. We want to click Control and then drag it. And we want to change it to an action to make it a function. And we're going to name it Show BTN Pressed. It's really good to make your actions very descriptive in any other functions that you might make. Very descriptive, because if you have a very big project, it's going to get very complicated to interact with your project if your functions are pretty vague or they're not very descriptive. This makes life a lot easier down the road, so I strongly recommend making them descriptive. And we're also going to want to drag over, control drag, this label here And we want that to stay an outlet. If any of you have prior programming experience, it'd be similar to kind of like a variable. And we're going to just name this, oh, excuse me, label. So let's add that. Okay, so that's all we need to add there. One last thing before we move on is we want this label to be hidden when we initially open up the application. We don't want it to be showing until we click the button that says Show Text Field. So how we're going to do that is we're going to come down here. We're under this kind of like it's the Show Attributes Inspector. It's kind of like a weird arrow. And we're going to go down to Drawing, and we're going to click Hidden. And what that's going to do is when we open up the application initially, that text field should not be there. That text field should be hidden. Okay, and now that we've got that done, let's go to the View controller. And in this function, Show Button Pressed, we are going to want to say Label, which is the label that we put over here. You can see how we named it. If you named it something different than label, then just put whatever the name of it is right here. And we're going to say dot is hidden equals false. So when we initially press this button, the label dot is hidden is set to true because we made it so you can't see the label. But as soon as that button's pressed, we want it to change that to equaling false so that the label will show itself. And I'm going to show you how that works. We're going to use an iPhone 7 Plus for our test. You're going to see the formatting of it looks a little bit weird because we haven't quite fixed that yet, but the basic concept is there. And if you go here to scale, you can actually make it a little bit bigger. I'm actually going to bring it back down to 50% for our simulator. Okay. And it can take a while to load sometimes depending on what kind of Xcode you're using, what kind of computer you have. Okay, here we go. So you can see the formatting is kind of weird. There's a lot of white space. The background doesn't fill the whole screen, and we're going to get to how to fix that in a second here. But I'm going to click Show Text Field, and it pops up. So that proves the concept we were trying to show here with this tutorial. So that's great. Moving on to fixing that background issue we were seeing. As you can see here, we were only doing this with the iPhone 7. So when we used the iPhone 7 Plus in our example, it ended up making the screen come out to about here, making it a little bit bigger, and that didn't work out very well for us. So the way that we're going to fix that, to make it universal not just for iPhone 7 Plus, but for all devices, is we're actually going to have to set the alignment of each of these different fields, the background, the button, and the label. We're going to have to set those alignments right now. And so we're going to click on the background. We want to come down to here to where it says Add New Constraints. And we're going to want to make sure that no matter how big or how small the screen is, the borders of this background will go all the way to the edge of the screen. We want to click Add Constraints. Next, we want to go to the text field. And what we want to do here is we actually want the text field, or I'm sorry, the button, we want the size of the button to stay the same no matter how big or how small our screen is. So I'm going to set it to a fixed width and height. Do not select this if you want the size of the button to change based off the screen. But for our example, we're going to give it a fixed width and height, and we're going to set the spacing of it. So we want it to be exactly 100 units from the top of the screen. So we're going to click right here and change that to 100, and let's click Add 3 Constraints. So you see it kind of moved it up here, and it made the box that perfect size that we discussed. Now you can see here there is this little red line, and that's showing that it's been aligned vertically, but it's not aligned horizontally. So the way that we want to fix that is we're actually going to go right here to this button which says Align, and we're going to click horizontally in Container. Want to make sure it's to 0, and we click Add Constraint. You can see all the constraints that you've added over here in this little ruler button, and you go down where it says Constraints, and you can see we've aligned it in the center to X. We have given it a width of 187, a height of 74, and we spaced it 100 from the top. So that's kind of how you can keep track of all the different constraints you've been adding onto different objects. Now we're going to do the label. We're going to do the same thing, add new constraints. We want it to be 50 from the object above it. So this is actually going to make it 50 from the bottom part of the button, not from the top of the screen. It's going to base it off of the closest object to it. And what we're also going to do actually is we're going to set, we're going to want to make sure that this width is actually flexible to the screen. So we're going to want it to always be 60 from the left and 60 from the right. So it'll always stretch to be exactly that distance from the left or right of the screen, no matter the size. And we're going to make the height a fixed height of 207. Okay. We want to add those constraints, and now I want to show you how this will work. So we'll do it again with the iPhone 7 Plus simulator. So take a second to load. And so if we did it correctly, it should stretch the background to the width of the screen, and it should make the different fields, the button and the label centered, and they should be a proper distance from the top and from the top of the button. Okay. And so you see the background worked, and the text, it looks perfect. You can't really tell that it stretched it, but it did. To show that, I'm actually going to do this one more time with an iPad Pro. Okay, here we go. So this is what it looks like for 7, iPhone 7. And this is what it's going to look like for the iPad Pro, the 9.7 inch. And this is just to prove the concept of making an application, the user experience, universal and stretching different objects. ShowTextField, and as you can see, it stretched it to be 60 from the left and the right. And there you go. So that's our basic tutorial. We've shown you how to make a simple application that will make a label appear, text field appear, showed you how to use buttons, and we've learned how to use buttons as actions inside of our view controller and how to make different outlets for our application. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to message me directly or post on this video, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.